of reference, and that would also help in terms of minimizing delay. Now, the prosecution process, that is basically the ODPP function, and I don't necessarily need to go into the details, but only just to emphasize that in the prosecution process, we need to be very aware in terms of the independence of the Office of the DPP in evaluating the evidence, making the decision to charge. We have sung enough about our presence in all the counties and officers in about 126 courts across the country, and which is critical in terms of accessibility and for persons to deal with the said offenses. Now, the office has also established a division, which is called it's the hate speech and the election justice division, currently headed by Mr. Mark Baraza. So basically, the role of that division is also to coordinate the activities of the office as far as elections is concerned. Yes, we've all worked with investigation files, and I don't think there's anyone here who doesn't know the structure of the file. And basically, this is just a checklist so that when a file is brought to us by the investigative agencies, we are able to confirm that it has all the relevant information that will enable us to make proper decisions. As opposed to in the past, I'm sure we've all experienced situations where a file is submitted and you only have a few documents. And this happens a lot, mostly with files which are brought directly to court officers who are manning, the stations. We find the files are brought in the morning at 6 a.m., Kibera, Makadara. The officer is expected to look at the file in the morning and make a decision to charge and have the accused person presented in the court by 9 or 8:30, depending on which station you're in. So basically, the checklist is not just for the prosecutors, but also for investigators to ensure that by the time the file is being submitted to the Office of the DPP, we have all those documents securely in the file, and that would also determine you as a prosecutor or me as a prosecutor what to do with a file that is incomplete. Now, case management system is one of the new babies in the Office of the DPP. And it is something that we are all required to comply with. The importance of case management system, particularly in managing election offenses, is that we are able to enhance accountability and ensure a process flow. Because one of the challenges, I think, of the past is that we've not had, or we've not been able to generate accurate data or information in terms of what number of cases that we have prosecuted in the past, during the past elections. And we are also very grateful that we've had assistance from other stakeholder agencies like the judiciary in terms of supplying that information. So a case management system in this context would require us to ensure that all that information, from the point the process is initiated or the file is submitted to the Office of the DPP, we are able to maintain accountability for everything. Now, the decision to charge, I believe that was also discussed, but I think I would want to gloss over it a little bit. The primary test, as we already know, there's the evidential test and there's the public interest test. My senior, Mr. Waroi, explained the evidential test very well, and we also have had authorities in terms of the judicial perspective of our assessment of the assessment of the evidence that we've presented in the past. Now, the public interest test in the context of election offenses is very fluid, and it is something that would have to be assessed on a case-by-case basis, because it shifts. It doesn't necessarily mean who makes the most noise, whether through media or through other forms. So basically, as prosecutors, we'll need to examine the set of facts that we have. Having established you have sufficient evidence, your assessment of whether there's public interest test requires you to make an alternative decision will be based on the circumstances of that particular case. And you also have our regional heads to give guidance where necessary. Again, the decision to charge, there are key points that we'll need to prove. We've gone through this. We have the electronic or digital evidence where available. We'll need to take cognizance of how admissibility and relevance, the physical evidence, the witness statements, and the expert report where necessary. For hate speech, the decision to charge, especially the evidential test, is unique because of the Rabat principle. Now, the Rabat principles were developed under the auspices of the United Nations, where different stakeholders came together, and the purpose of it was basically to come up with a structure on how we are able to distinguish between what constitutes the freedom of speech and what constitutes hate speech or incitement. So basically, the Rabat principle or the Rabat plan of action gives us a context within which we can define whether the circumstances you have been presented with amounts to freedom of speech or hate speech. The first one is the context, where we are asking ourselves, what is the social or political context within which that statement was made? Secondly, the speaker. What is the status or the position of the speaker in the society? Is it a person of influence, or is it somebody who's insignificant? Insignificant in the sense that whatever he says may not have an impact on anyone except for their own person. The third is the intent, which is basically the mens rea. What is the intention of the speaker? What was the speaker trying to achieve? Was there an intention to incite? Was there an intention to cause a certain activity or a certain response to occur? And then number 5, there's the extent to which the speech is disseminated. How many people have had access to that speech, either in terms of the presence in the audience where the speech was being made, or in terms of transmission, whether via social media or other forms of electronic transmission. And lastly, the likelihood of harm, including imminence. Is what has been said likely to cause harm to anyone or to any group of people, any ethnic community, etc. And that also resonates with the examples of the judicial precedents that we basically shared earlier. Yes, so after a decision to charge has been made, is still on the role of the prosecution in terms of plea, bail bond, and disclosure. When it comes to plea, or rather the charge, yes, plea, the charges have to be drawn in accordance with the law. You will notice that the compendium has availed to us the sample charge sheets, what is required to be present in the charge sheets, the possible, or rather the applicable penalty, and also the elements that we as prosecutors will need to prove. There's also the issue of bail and bond. We'll also have to be alive to the bail and bond guidelines and the civil procedure code. And then disclosure. Disclosure has been bone of contention in many cases, not only hate speech and election offenses. So it is our responsibility as a prosecution to ensure that all disclosure is made as soon as possible to avoid delays. Having established that we must ensure that we receive a file that is complete with all the relevant evidence from the investigative officers, then we also have a responsibility to ensure that the accused person has all the evidence that we'll be relying on. So there is no cause for delay when we have all the information. Now, the witness protection is another key consideration, because I think election offenses is one area in which you expect to come across a lot of those instances where witnesses fear for their life or they fear for the repercussions. Given that most of the accused persons you'll find in election-related offenses are politicians, so they are people of influence and people of great reach. So your witnesses may be ordinary people who probably have valid reasons for concerns as to their safety. In reviewing the evidence or reviewing the files, the Office of the DPP, the investigative agencies as well, need to stay aware of the kind of witnesses that you're dealing with, the potential risks that they may be exposed to. And one important thing we need to acknowledge is the role of the Witness Protection Agency. It is the Witness Protection Agency that has the responsibility of evaluating and determining whether the witness may, as the Office of the DPP or as the investigative agency, our role is to, whenever a witness comes out and says, I am afraid, imagined, and determine the level of the nature of protection that could be. A crime transcends different boundaries. There are instances where we may require mutual legal assistance from other jurisdictions. There may be need for cross-border investigations. There may be need for legal or administrative assistance from other foreign states. The procedure we should be aware of is to make a request through the proper channels. We have the hate speech division, and we also have the ODPP MLA division. So there also has to be a lot of coordination between the relevant divisions within the Office of the DPP. Plea bargaining. In the Office of the DPP, we have the plea bargaining guidelines, which are currently being implemented. Basically, what you're saying is that the option of plea bargaining is also available for election and hate speech offenses. So whenever opportunities arise or requests are being made by the accused persons or persons proposed to be charged, the proper procedure is to make reference to the plea bargaining guidelines, make reference to Section 137 of the CPC, and our policy, and actually what is required is that the approval has to be done by the DPP himself. So before entering into any plea bargain agreement, a request has to be made for the DPP to approve. So one key thing we have established is the need for interagency collaboration. Let me say interagency and intra-agency collaboration, because as we've established, we have different institutions, independent institutions, which are supposed to exercise their mandate with independence and without interference from external stakeholders. But we also have a working relationship to the extent that the success of one institution's work largely depends on the success of the other institution. So for election offenses, there's no way out. Our relationship with the investigative agencies, our relationship with the witness protection agencies, our relationship with IPOA and other agencies, as well as the judiciary, has to be cordial, respectful, within the law, we have to invest in training and sensitization, joint training and sensitization, as what we have in this forum, and also sharing of resources and information, because working in silos has shown us that it breaks the chain. We've had so many times of ODPP or EACC or National Police Service or the judiciary having been accused of. And it's all because when the chain breaks, there's no connectedness in terms of how we work. Yet our objective is basically to serve